Welcome on the cosmic atom. History does not remember the quiet multitude. It recalls the moment they yelled. For years, you went through storms that no one acknowledged were occurring. You were deceived in broad daylight, but the audience ignored your agony as if it were an optical illusion. But allow me to tell you something terrifying. More than 70% of whistleblowers experience reprisal for sharing the truth rather than lying. It's too early. Sounds familiar? You were not insane. You were early. You weren't too loud. You were just too accurate for a society addicted to denial. And now, the same throng that abandoned you during your crucifixion is returning with megaphones. The quiet has broken. The dam has broken. And those who previously questioned you are now marching not just with you, but because of you. Let's get genuine. It is poetic. The same people who earlier ignored your calls for justice are now repeating your words as gospel and behaving as if they always knew. Cute, right? However, this is not about petty vengeance or public approbation. This is about the heavenly response to years of spiritual gaslighting. This is the season when heaven says enough. So buckle up, the chosen one, because in this episode, we are no longer whispering. The crowd is increasing, and this time, they're loud, proud, and late for the party. You began with quiet. Let's dig in. Number 1, people finally recognize you as the villain. It was just the mirror that made them uneasy. They finally realized you were never the villain. It was just the mirror that made them uneasy. People like discussing the truth until it appears in human form. And it was who you were. Not a danger, not an issue, not an enemy. They weren't prepared to see themselves through you. You didn't even need to say much. Just by being yourself. You become the mirror by being true to yourself, having depth, and being self-aware. They were unable to flee. You mirrored their dishonesty, envy, feigned friendliness, and fear, and their ego-driven decisions. Instead of confronting what they saw, they blamed the mirror. They called you too much, too sensitive, too emotional, or too theatrical. Not because you were, but because your presence made their masks seem too tight. You awakened something old in them. Truth. They've been running away from you because you called out spiritual sloth by simply walking with intention. You revealed manipulation by refusing to submit to it. For a long time, they bought into the lie that you were the issue because it was simpler than evolving. But time has a way of revealing what flattery and gaslighting attempted to conceal. Now, the same people who regarded you as a disturbance are understanding you were a divine disruption. You were intended to cause awakening, not turmoil. And they're waking up. People are gradually saying things like they were right all along, or I didn't understand it then, but I see it now. It's more than simply you being vindicated. It's about people realizing how they contributed to your crucifixion because they weren't ready to confront themselves. It's about acknowledging the hurt they did by rejecting what was intended to help them develop. And that is why they are rising today, not just to defend you, but also to face themselves. What you represented is now being recognized. Not because you changed, but because they did. And although they may never completely comprehend the weight you bore or the restraint required to tolerate their misunderstanding, one thing is certain. They no longer perceive you as the villain. They perceive you as the mirror that they previously smashed. However, there is a greater need today than ever. Number 2, the same individuals who remained quiet are now plagued by their inactivity. The same folks who remained quiet are now plagued by their inactivity. They saw what was happening to you. Perhaps not every detail, but enough to realize something was wrong and feel the unfairness. Enough to make you feel a gut tug. However, this is not right. But they kept silent. They chose comfort over boldness. They decided not to become involved. They didn't realize that their silence constituted its own type of engagement. And now, That quiet is louder than any falsehood said about you. They believed they were safeguarding their calm. What they actually did was safeguard the illusion, the veneer of civility that enabled cruelty to grow unabated while you were ostracized, slandered, broken down, or deceived. They persuaded themselves that it was none of their concern. But time has revealed everything. In the stillness, they cloak themselves and has turned into remorse. Stillness always comes at a cost. And for some, the cost comes in the shape of restless nights and painful memories. They recall your expressions, your wordless pleas for aid. They recall instances when they could have spoken out or defended. You reached out but opted not to respond. And the shame of it stings more now that they know who you really were. Not the villain, not the issue, the one who kept it together despite being ripped apart. They are not tormented because you failed. They are plagued because you did not. You rose nonetheless, because you recovered in front of the same throng that had abandoned you. Because you are still standing, not as a victim, but as a silent storm that revealed the truth. Does not need an audience to thrive. Now they want to put things right. Some people will speak up. Some people will openly support you. Others will do so secretly, too embarrassed to say how badly they let you down. Only one thing is certain. They're silent. They understand that it will cost them something. They did not just watch you suffer. They saw themselves fail. A test of allegiance, honesty, and fundamental humanity. And the weight of it will stick with them much longer than any rumor. Did you? Number 3, your seclusion served as a wake-up call for them, not your failure. They felt leaving you alone would shatter you, so they pulled away, remained mute, or pretended you didn't exist. You would ultimately disintegrate. They saw your seclusion as weakness. They didn't comprehend, however, that solitude is where selected ones are honed rather than wrecked. While they waited for your demise, you were realigned. You were shedding previous incarnations of yourself, detoxing from their projections, and reconnecting with the most profound aspects of your soul. Initially, the quiet was awful. You questioned everything. You wondered if you were mad, whether you had done something wrong, and if you deserved it. That was how deep the emotional sabotage had gone. But something tremendous began to change. The more they moved away, the closer you came to the truth. You recognized that their absence was not punishment. It was for protection. It allowed room for you to see clearly, think freely, and break free from emotional manipulation masquerading as love. The folks who went away felt they were taking something from you, but they were really giving you the greatest gift: clarity without the commotion you saw. Who was genuine, and who was just riding the wave of your brightness without distractions. You knew who you were before you learned to shrink. And while they mistook your silence for defeat, you were quietly laying a foundation that they couldn't shake even if they tried. They're beginning to feel it. The audience is waking up. They're discovering that your seclusion did not kill you, but rather expose them. It demonstrated how easy individuals forsake things they don't comprehend. It demonstrated how eager people are to follow the majority, even when it is incorrect. And it revealed how powerful you really are, because you rose from a position that most people do not recover from. Your seclusion did not kill you. It exposed you to the version of yourself that does not need praise, affirmation, or support. And that version? That's who the audience is now cheering for. Because the stillness that once enveloped you has transformed into irrefutable evidence. You overcame what was intended to break you without becoming bitter or tiny. That is power number 4. They insulted you in public, yet your receipts were heavenly and timely. They insulted you in public, yet your receipts were heavenly and timely. They laughed aloud. They made a spectacle of your name. Your suffering became their pleasure. They took your narrative and ran with it. You were certain that you lacked the authority and platform to defend yourself. They gave their version first, knowing that people prefer to trust the loudest speaker rather than the truth. And you stayed silent not because you were weak, but because you had been spiritually ordered to wait. You did not need to reveal them. Time was already gathering evidence while they were busy acting, chronicling their lives, and making illusions. Heaven was filming everything. Every discussion, every betrayal, and every false charge was being saved not for revenge, but for justice. Divine timing does not hurry to cleanse your identity. It waits till the quiet is deafening. Until your absence begins, ask questions no one can answer. And now the receipts are arriving, some in the form of real evidence. Screenshots, messages, eyewitnesses, whistleblowers, and other forms of divine interruption. Unexplainable changes, unanticipated exposes, spiritual downloads, and encountering individuals who previously condemned you mercilessly. The truth is no longer hidden. It isn't even knocking. It is busting through doors. People are surprised, not because you were correct, but because you never used filthy tactics to show it. That's what's driving their ascent. That's why they're supporting you right now. You carried treachery without announcing it. You withstood humiliation without having to clap back. When the truth eventually came out, it was so apparent and achingly exact that it couldn't have been a coincidence. They didn't realize the stillness was part of a larger plan. There was monitoring in paradise, that the Most High does more than only safeguard the chosen ones. He saves everything. That is what shook them, not simply the truth, but how precisely it is delivered, the way it landed, the timing, the clarity. It's not vengeance. It's a heavenly calculation. The audience is now watching. The tables turn, and for once, they're not just on your side. They're standing on it because what was once hidden has become visible, and the person they once ridiculed, that individual has become the unavoidable disclosure. Number 5, the people realized who was really tossing the stones. For the longest time, the people could tell who was really hurling the stones. All eyes were on you. You were the one being torn apart, criticized, gossiped about, and blamed. They behaved as if you couldn't accept criticism and were overreacting. But what's coming out now is the portion they attempted to hide. The beginning. The portion in which the assaults began with them initiating quiet warfare while wearing masks of righteousness, rather than you defending yourself. They came at you clean, smiling in your face, praying in public, citing scripture, and using spiritual language as a disguise to conceal their brutality. But behind closed doors, they were slandering you, isolating you, and having others doubt your integrity while seeming to be worried. And since they dressed appropriately, said the correct things, and had the proper connections, the audience first believed them. However, even when deeply buried, the truth has a weird way of rising to the surface. And now those who formerly stood on the sidelines are asking the appropriate questions. Who initiated all this? The same people who seemed to be attempting to assist are now being exposed for who they really were. Manipulators, instigators, and saboteurs hidden behind spiritual jargon and phony smiles, which startled everyone. It wasn't only that stones were being hurled. Who was tossing them? The ones who always seemed serene. Those who spoke the loudest about grace and humility. Those who were fast to respond. Let us pray about it while poisoning others behind your back. Now the masks are slipping off. The audience is now focused on who cast the first shadow, rather than who yelled the loudest. It's no longer about minimizing damage or just moving on. It's about accountability and the truth. And for the first time, people see that you were not the storm. You were the intended target, as were the folks who flung the stones. They realize it's more than simply your reputation. They do harm to their own property. That is now subject to judgment. Number 6, you murmured gently, yet reality supported your words. You spoke quietly, but reality supported your assertion. You were not loud, and you didn't have to be. You weren't out here vying for attention or persuading folks to choose your side. You stated the truth quietly and clearly, without theatrics. And since you didn't shout or plead, they assumed you had no case. They thought that stillness represented weakness, calm implied guilt, and that being soft-spoken meant being rejected. But truth does not need loudness. It just takes time. While they were playing and attempting to influence public opinion, you let reality to do what it does best: expose. You did not follow individuals down to establish your value. You allow the days, months, results, and trends speak for you. And now the exact events you warned about, betrayals, injustices, and spiritual violations, are taking place in plain sight. Everything you predicted is now happening, and not in a hazy or figurative sense. It is precise. It is particular. It is obvious. People who previously dismissed you are now paying attention to what you say. Prophecy is like age. The people who labeled you theatrical are now checking timelines, revisiting discussions, and seeing you are not responding. You were exposing. What was formerly considered hyperbole is now seen as foresight. What was formerly labeled paranoia is now known as perception. This is why the audience is changing. Not because you changed, but because the realities had caught up. Reality began to closely mirror your truth, forcing even those who refuse to accept it to rethink. It is difficult to argue with consequences, and the outcomes are obvious. You did not win because you yelled louder. You won because you were in line with the truth. You rely on character rather than chaos to protect yourself. You let consistency speak where the fog used to matter. Even the naysayers concede that your voice, however mild, was never incorrect. Justice is not just being served. It is being observed in real time. And the quiet one they used to dismiss has become irrefutable evidence. Number 7, your narrative was more than simply personal. It was prophetic. Your narrative wasn't just personal. It was prophetic. At first, it seemed like a lonely, hard, and unjust path. You kept wondering, why me? It's as if life picked you for punishment. You were struggling with betrayal, solitude, and spiritual assaults, which didn't make sense. People you trusted become chilly. You were misunderstood, neglected, and rejected by many who professed to be holy. But you didn't recognize it at the time. Your narrative wasn't random. It was a glimpse, a live message, and a prophetic pattern disguised as suffering. You weren't just surviving. You were laying the groundwork for a spiritual warfare route that others are just now beginning to follow. The same themes you encountered: phony compassion, spiritual manipulation, and the abuse of power disguised as religion. All of this is now occurring to others. The difference is that they're not going through it blindly. They remember your narrative. They recall how you handled the situation. They recall how you stood up, told the truth, established limits, and did not lose your soul in the process. People are beginning to realize that your path was never about you. You were instructed to go into the fire first, so that others would not be consumed by it. You were sent ahead as a spiritual scout, absorbing strikes, learning the pitfalls, and paving the path for those who would follow. That's why your testimony resonates differently today. It is more than simply inspiring. It is also instructive. Your narrative is survival intelligence. People are examining your words, cautions, and decisions. And now they finally understand. You weren't too theatrical. You weren't imagining anything. You lived in real time, what they're just now beginning to experience. And suddenly, the same narrative that once made them uncomfortable is now providing them the vocabulary to express their own suffering. What first seemed like rejection was really divine placement. You were ahead of the game, a spiritual forerunner. And now the audience is rising not just to praise you, but also to follow your example. Because you did not just suffer what was intended to break you. You've decrypted it. And now, others are surviving because you were bold enough to tell your experience publicly. Number 8, they're experiencing the same thing that happened to you. And this is why they're marching. They are experiencing the same thing that happened to you. And this is why they're marching. For a long time, you seemed like an outsider. The person who was very emotional, reactive, or sensitive. You spoke out about things that others claimed didn't happen. You identified manipulation, gaslighting, control, and subtle brutality in areas that were intended to be secure. Instead of being believed, you were pushed aside, stigmatized, and silenced. They made you feel like you were the problem, as if you were making everything up. But the script has reversed, and not because you changed, but because the truth has finally reached the masses. They're going through the same thing you did. The masks have dropped from their own lives. The same strategies that almost destroyed you are being used on others. The same individuals who use compassion against you are now playing the same tricks in other people's lives. And this time, the manipulation is not going unnoticed. Why? Because now they understand how it feels. This is not sympathy. This is a common suffering. They aren't rising to soothe you. They're rising because they recognize themselves in your tale. It is one thing to hear of treachery. It's another thing to experience it. And after people felt the spiritual hurt for themselves, your speech became less theatrical and more truthful. Your narrative became a guide, a map. You set the foundation even while many accused you of being insane. You didn't merely discuss survival. You demonstrated what survival looks like. How to recover without being nasty. How to create limits without feeling guilty. How to maintain your identity while everything around you is attempting to remove it. They now understand. They are now marching beside you rather than behind you. Because you're more than simply a name they've heard about. You are live evidence that what attempted to destroy them does not have to succeed. And they are marching because, deep down, they know the truth. You were never insane. You were the first. Number 9, your quiet was not weakness. It was evidence-based control. Your quiet was not weakness. It was evidence-based control. They were expecting you to break. In fact, they were counting on it. They wanted you to crack, lose control, and say anything that might be used against you. The plan was straightforward. Provoke you just enough to make your response seem like the issue. They stayed back and pretended to be innocent. But you did not fall for it. You did not give them the outburst. They could spin. You did not create a situation for them to point fingers at. Instead, you maintained silent. And the quiet was not passive. It was strategic. You choose observation over conflict. You were watching. You listened. You made mental notes as they underestimated you. Every lie, insult, and manipulation. You were collecting it like receipts in a folder entitled Truth, spending as they were telling their version of the tale. You were building your case not for vengeance, but for revelation. People mistook your quiet for capitulation. However, you never retreated. You were recording. You weren't silent because you were terrified. You were silent because you recognized the importance of time. You were aware that when truth finally moves, there's no need to yell. It simply lands. And now the moment has arrived. The havoc they produce today speaks louder than anything you stated. Their lives are catching up to them. Their masks are falling, and their inconsistencies are becoming apparent. In contrast, your calmness reveals all. You didn't need to expose anybody. They did it to themselves, attempting to fill the void you left behind. That's why people are listening to you right now. Not because you demanded it, but because your restraint demonstrated who you really are. Anyone may raise a fuss, but not everyone can sit with the truth long enough to let it speak for itself. You did, and now your quiet has become the loudest testimony in the room. They wanted drama. You handed them documents. and the evidence is doing just what it was designed to accomplish. Clarify your name while accusing their character. Number 10. You've never required affirmation, but now it's approaching with thunder. You've never required affirmation, but now it's approaching with thunder. You did not reconstruct yourself for attention. You did not recover only to illustrate a point. You collected your shattered parts silently in hidden nooks. No one cared to check while they were busy watching those who could mimic perfection. You were doing the tough, lonely labor of survival. You were hurting in quiet, forgiving alone, and developing where no one could see. No applause, no congrats. Simply raw, holy growth. They didn't realize you were sinking since your anguish made no noise. You did not ask for compassion. You did not share your pain or exploit it as cash. You persevered, not because it was simple, but because there was no other option. And they ignored you, devalued you, and even ridiculed your quiet. You continued to build brick by brick, scar after scar, lesson after lesson. Something has shifted. People who previously disregarded your collapse are now taking note of your ascent. And not because you're yelling, but because your presence is unmistakable. Your development is audible. Your radiance is audible. The piece on you now has its own volume. And the throng that formerly scrolled over your anguish is now pausing to inquire, how did they survive that? But here's the deal. You are not rising with bitterness. I am sorry, but you're not seeking for posts or long overdue applause. You don't need their approval, and you never did. That is what gives this moment such strength. You are not waiting for their approval. But now that it's here, it's loud, forceful, and respectful. People who previously misunderstood you are now citing your wisdom. They're referring to your adventure. They're watching whether or not you asked for it, since your progress has become difficult to ignore. The ashes they discarded are the same soil from which your mission developed. And now they've gathered not just to see your homecoming, but also to learn from it. You were unmistakable not because you yelled, but because you remained yourself, grounded, and allowed your resurrection to speak for itself. Number 11. Your anguish became their playbook. They now owe you respect. Your anguish became their playbook. They now owe you respect. People watched as your life fell apart. Some did it out of curiosity, some out of judgment, others out of silent interest. You were their quiet amusement, the drama, the anguish, the chaos. They watched as you lost people, chances, and peace of mind. And instead of assisting, many others leaned back and examined you like a case study. They wanted to see whether you disintegrate, lose your wits, lash out, or fade away. But something unexpected occurred. You got back up, not with a dramatic return or sudden miracle, but with tiny, unwavering movements that resulted in something tangible. You recovered in front of those who wanted to see your failure become permanent. You stood up for yourself when no one else did. And when you ascended, they took notes silently and with wide eyes. They witnessed how you handled betrayal with limits, how to rebuild without vengeance, how you may transform your wounds into knowledge. What they refused to acknowledge is that your suffering taught them more than any self-help book ever could. They began emulating your thoughts, echoing your language, and following the trails you made through fire. They noticed your blueprint, not just the highlight reel, but the whole raw behind-the-scenes structure, complete with sweat, solitude, and sleepless nights. And now they're wandering about, using what they've learned from observing you. Some are even achieving success with the exact knowledge they derided while it was still wrapped in your anguish. They did not only observe your struggle, they borrowed from it. They absorbed your survival strategies like silent pupils at a school they never admitted attending, whether they say it aloud or not. They understand that they owe you respect, not because you demand it, but because your influence can be seen throughout their growth. You weren't just surviving, you were setting the standard. And now that they're prospering on the foundation you created in silence, the least they can do is pay tribute to the one they silently studied while pretending not to notice. Number 12. You were the seed that they sought to bury, but you grew into the root that holds the land together. You were the seed that they sought to bury, but you grew into the root that holds the land together. They believed they were done. They cut you off, tarnished your name, and slammed every door in your face. They figured it was the end of your storyline. They interpreted stillness for surrender, solitude for collapse. They didn't comprehend you weren't vanishing. You were evolving beneath in areas they couldn't see. You were taking root softly, profoundly, and strongly, while others laughed on the surface. You were being altered below it. Every insult weakened your resolve, and every treachery strained your capabilities. Every lonely night became a school, teaching you how to develop without validation, how to rely on yourself rather than others, and how to create stability. No storm could shake. What seemed like defeat was really depth. You were going down so you could go back up strong and remain up. Now that the fruit is beginning to reveal the serenity, confidence, breakthrough, and strength in your presence, those who formerly neglected you are in awe because you did not return seeking vengeance. You returned anchored, stable, and grounded. You become the very thing that has now stabilized as others. Even those who attempted to bury you realized they did not destroy you. They planted you. The audience is increasing now that they have seen the facts. You didn't just survive. Your support, advice, narrative, and strength. It feeds humans, providing guidance, inspiring them. They're showing up, not just to apologize, but also to respect what they had previously overlooked. They now realize that while everyone else was pursuing clout, you were constructing a legacy right under their feet. What they attempted to stifle has become the very voice that binds others together. What they attempted to destroy has become the basis upon which so many people now stand. You're no longer merely a survivor. You are a root system that bears the weight of others who are just now starting to grasp what you have gone through. They're not simply watching anymore. They're watering because what they attempted to bury has become holy and unstoppable. Number 13. They didn't expect you to outlast the story, but you changed it. They didn't expect you to survive the story, but you revised it after they lied to you. They anticipated the tale to stay. They believed their version would become your identity. They portrayed you as the antagonist, the unstable one, the failure, the phony. And they said it so often and with such passion that even people who had never met you believed it. That is how certain they were that you would not survive their slander campaign. They did not only strive to harm your reputation. They attempted to make your failure a permanent headline. But you accomplished something people did not expect. You continued living. You kept healing. You kept climbing. Not to prove them incorrect, but to be loyal to who you are. You refused to shrink to suit the false picture they manufactured. You did not waste your time clapping back or seeking acceptance. You accomplished something far more powerful. You allowed the truth to emerge via your deeds, energy, and calm constancy. The audience is rising now because what they are witnessing contradicts the story they were told. They are watching you go in, grace, and you have every right to feel furious. They are seeing how you walk with serenity, not pettiness. You did not return with the intent to ruin anybody. You return whole, and this is what is shaking them. Anyone may be bitter. Anybody can toss dirt back. But the one who converts injustice into knowledge and treachery into compassion, that individual is memorable. You are a living paradox in their lives. You become the message that no preacher could offer because you exemplify real spiritual development. Love without losing your edge. Forgive without forgetting. Elevating Without announcing it, your life preaches a message that exposes flimsy religion, phony apologies, and theatrical purity. They believe they had written your conclusion, but you rewrote the whole story with disclosure rather than retribution. And now the audience is waking up to not just your truth, but also to the existence of love, integrity, and divine justice. You are their evidence. They're not simply watching anymore. They're listening. Number 14. You were never alone. You were barely ahead. You were never alone. You were barely ahead. They misunderstood your clarity for arrogance, your haste for violence, and your profound insights for delusion. You stated realities that made others uncomfortable, not because they were incorrect, but because they were too realistic for their mental and spiritual state. You sensed the adjustments before they occurred. You named the darkness before it became fashionable to speak out. You could see beneath the masks that others were still cheering. And since you were not in tune with the majority, they identified you as the issue. You were never too much. You simply arrived early. For a time, it seemed like exile or loneliness. You were walking the truth in a world still filled with deception. When you are surrounded by people who cannot or will not see, having that type of vision might seem like a curse. But suddenly everything is altering. The exact things you warned about, the patterns you identified, and the spiritual pitfalls you attempted to emphasize. They're no longer theories. They are occurring to them. And that's why the audience is growing. Not because they suddenly grew to like you. Not because they awoke more sympathetic, but because reality finally matched the truth you held. They now understand that they've seen it for themselves after feeling the pain of what you attempted to identify years ago. You were not alone. You were just traveling the trail before the map was produced. They felt your intensity was a defect, but they now see it as insight. They felt your depth was unneeded, but now they're drowning in shallow waters, seeking what you've always held. They did not alter their views. They caught up. Here's the beauty of it. You are not bitter. You're not holding it over their heads. You're inviting them into a reality that you've never ceased carrying. You didn't tone down your personality to fit in, even if it meant losing connections, tranquility, and sense of belonging. And the planet is finally rising to match your frequency. You were not rejected because you were mistaken. You were denied because you came too early. And now the mob is prepared to follow the course. You walked alone. They assumed you were done. Forgotten, outnumbered. They didn't comprehend, however, that you were always in harmony. You were not abandoned. You were positioned. Everything they attempted to bury became the dirt that nourished your roots. And now there's evidence everywhere. You suffered the slander. You endured the stillness. You maintained your composure as they caused havoc. And you didn't just endure the story. You rewrote it with grace, depth, and God. The throng that formerly glanced away can no longer ignore what is in front of them. They are not only watching your comeback, they are rising in celebration of it. Not because you deserve to claim, but because your life exemplifies divine timing, spiritual purity, and unwavering tenacity. This is more than just being vindicated. This is about legacy, regarding the rippling impact of your endurance, about the reality that people are finally waking up to not just what was done to you, but also what they neglected to see in you. And now, they're not only standing up to protect your name, they are rising because your adventure restored their faith. You did not need a crowd to be picked. However, when a mob catches up, they are approaching with strength rather than pity, prepared to stand by the very truth you carried alone. And that truth is unshakable. So move confidently, talk plainly, and don't cower. Because what they despised in isolation is now revered in revelation. You were never too early. You were right on time. And suddenly the globe is rising to meet the pace you've been maintaining all along. If this message resonated with you, If you sense the power of rising above the noise and standing in your truth, don't keep it to yourself. Click the subscribe button right now to join a community of fighters who refuse to be silenced, like this video demonstrating that resilience wins. Please share your tale in the comments section below. Your voice matters, and together, we become stronger. Please share this with everyone who needs to hear the truth today, because as the throng increases, everything changes. Your breakthrough begins here. Let us rise together. Dear viewers, your support through Super Chat and membership is the only source of income that keeps this channel running. If you want me to continue uploading valuable content without delays and to stay motivated in providing you with the best wisdom, I need your help. Every contribution, big or small, makes a huge difference. Feel free to donate and support Pure Wisdom so we can keep growing together. Your generosity keeps this journey alive.
If you're enjoying the content on Pure Wisdom and find value in the messages we share, I encourage you to subscribe. Based on the latest analytics, 93.9% of viewers are watching without subscribing. By subscribing, you not only stay updated with new content, but also support the channel's growth, allowing us to continue spreading wisdom for the chosen ones. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an important message. Let's build this community together.